Governor Jerry Brown agrees to Donald Trump's request for National Guard troops at the border, but they come with conditions. Confusion reigns at the Sheriff's Department over policies and practices regarding pregnant inmates and the reporting of deaths. And the city recently bought a downtown building to help solve the homeless crisis, but critics say too much was paid for an ill-suited building. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, watchdog reporter Jeff McDonald of the San Diego Union-Tribune, freelance journalist Kelly Davis, and KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh. Well, California Governor Jerry Brown decided this week he didn't want another fight with Donald Trump. Brown agreed to send 400 National Guard troops to the border. But the mission is to target criminals like human traffickers and those who smuggle drugs and guns. And Steve, start by reminding us here what Trump pushed for when he said a military presence at the border.
Well, that's the question here. In a tweet, he says military presence. The order that came through the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, seems to be much more in line with what we've seen in past border operations, like when Governor Schwarzenegger sent troops to the border in 2006 and then again in 2010 under the Obama administration. But essentially what they want to do, they want to call up as many as 4,000 troops to aid in some sort of mission defending against illegal immigration and to enforce immigration policy. But
Brown, in his statement about this, he scoffed at Trump's wall once again. And what did the governor, his order, allow the troops to do?
So he put several conditions. He was, first of all, Governor Brown was the last of the four border governors to actually say yes to this, and he put several conditions on, including that they would not work on border enforcement, they would not do anything as far as building a wall, no rounding up of women and children or asylum seekers, as he put it. There is a tentative end date of September 30th if both parties don't agree to extend it.
Okay, and there's some confusion on whether, did Trump agree with all this, or the Pentagon, or what's going on that end?
Well, over the last couple of days, it's very hard to go between the tweets we see coming out of the White House and the policy we see coming out of the White House. And when Governor Brown sent out this letter with all these conditions, it was warmly received by the Trump administration. President Trump, who has called the Governor Moonbeam very recently, praised him for doing this. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, thanked the governor for participating and glad that everyone was on board. But so far, we have actually not seen the signed agreement from the Pentagon. And just before we came on air, I got word back from the California National Guard referring that question, whether or not this has all been signed off on, ready to go, call up the 400 troops. They referred those questions back to the Pentagon.
So the troops aren't actually there yet. I guess they are in Texas and other border states.
They are. They've already called them up. Texas already had a number of troops already on the border even before this. And of course, California has troops that are working with different federal entities. There are some 55 of them in the San Diego area that work in some various support roles.
Now, under federal law, there are limitations, right, on what the National Guard can do in situations like this in regard to these kind of orders.
Posse comitatus. Mark, one day we're going to have to do a whole show in Latin.
That's good.
But yes, so that is an act that was passed right after the Civil War to essentially prevent martial law from occurring in the South. It limits how the active duty Army can enforce domestic laws. It's part of a whole sort of suite of different laws and precedents. The Posse Comitatus only mentions the Army specifically, and then it was later amended to include the Air Force. Doesn't include the Marines, the Navy, or even the Coast Guard, which of course enforces federal law all the time.
Homeland Security, who knows? Yeah. Things have changed. Is it surprising Brown finally agreed to it, even in the limited way?
Well, as we've said, the National Guard often works in support roles here with the federal government. They work with the Border Patrol in certain capacities. So it's not unheard of. And if the governor agrees to do this and keep them under state control rather than having them federalized, this would give the governor more control to set the conditions that he's set.
All right, I wanted to hear, we have bites from a couple of players in this. First, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions arguing the guard is needed, and then Debbie Kang, you interviewed at UC San Diego, and she wrote a book about the history of immigration law on the U.S.-Mexico border. So we're going to hear them back to back here.
We have a crisis here. We know it, the president knows it, and we're determined to do something about it.
For fiscal year 2017, undocumented immigration fell to approximately 300,000, and that's the lowest number since 1971. So I'm not sure exactly what sort of crisis they will be addressing.
And of course, President Trump ran, this was a huge central plank of his campaign, immigration and secure the border wall. We've talked about that quite a bit, and critics say Trump is demagogued on the issue, and as they're pointing out, the numbers are way down. Governor Brown said that as well, right?
Indeed. You know, where is the crisis here? Illegal immigration has actually been down. It's a real low point. Illegal immigration from Mexico specifically is at a 10-year low. So the question is, why now? Why do this now? And that is going to be the question going forward here as you see these troops down the border. This is going to call additional attention to it. And what exactly will be the role of these troops along the border? What are they going to do?
And it's kind of notable when President Trump was in San Diego to look at those border wall prototypes a month ago. You didn't see the governor, leaders, even Mayor Faulconer, who's a Republican in the same party, show up at the president's event there.
Sure, it's a real tightrope for San Diego. In fact, the San Diego Chamber of Commerce came out against this and urged Governor Brown not to authorize troops to go to the border. They don't like the optics of having troops along the border as they try to work with Mexico.
All right,
economically.
Before we leave this segment, I wanted to talk about another story you reported on recently, Navy efforts to retain soldiers as the fleet expands. Tell us about the Golden Ticket Program.
The Golden Ticket Program. Well, this is part of one of many things that the Navy is trying to do to encourage people to stay with the Navy. You get a sabbatical here. You get a golden ticket. You can leave for a year, test civilian life, and then come back and resume your career right where you left off. This is all part of an effort to try to keep the numbers up. They're looking at expanding not just the Navy, but all of the active duty military. And it's going to be a real challenge. They don't know if they can make their numbers.
What are some of the other efforts they're doing to make it a little sweeter life for the Navy folks?
Well, yeah, they're doing all sorts of things to try to make Navy life just a little bit easier. You have a lot of two-career Navy families at this point. They try to space out their deployment so you don't have both parents deploying at the same time. That's still at the needs of the Navy, though. So sometimes, I've talked to sailors who, they both had to go. They both had a mission, so they both had to go. So it's not an easy thing to do to retain these Navy personnel.
And as you say, the pressure on retention is more now than ever. I mean, are they meeting their numbers, or do they admit even with these sweeteners it's going to be tough?
Right now, the Navy is. The Army is very much in danger of not making those. And there are shortages throughout all of the military, including pilots are a huge issue. They're an enormous issue for the Air Force, which is way down. And it's also becoming a larger issue for the Navy as well, trying to keep these really highly trained people from leaving after you've spent millions of dollars to train them up.
Right. All right. Well, it looks like there's going to be follow-ups to see what happens with the border and the border troops there, and also what the retention results are as we move forward. We're going to move on now. What's going on with the Sheriff's Department and its jail system? Confusion seemed to be the watchword this week regarding policies and practices. This involves how pregnant inmates are treated and when the public learns of deaths of those in custody. And let's start with inmates giving birth. The story from officials with the Sheriff's Department was women in labor and delivery are routinely handcuffed or otherwise shackled. And Kelly, you reported those statements in Voice of San Diego this week. Let's start with what the department officials told you for your story.
Yeah, well, to start, the impetus for the story was a letter that the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board,
known as CLRB,
sent to the Sheriff's Department back in December. This was in response to a complaint they received. And CLRB took issue with something called the pregnant patients' rights, and it's a statement that pregnant women are read as they're booked into jail. And a line in the statement said that you will be chained and handcuffed during labor and delivery. So I saw that, contacted the Sheriff's Department, and said, just asked for some clarification. And they told me that is the case, that the department spokeswoman told me that, yes, all inmates start off minimally restrained, one wrist to the bed or something similar while they're in the hospital.
Okay, and then the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board said they wanted to change that wording. They wanted to update that policy.
Yeah, they asked, CLRB asked the Sheriff's Department, this statement doesn't jibe with state law. State law says that first there needs to be a finding that this woman poses a flight risk or a safety risk. Then, if they make that finding, then they can restrain a woman during labor. The Sheriff's Department, so CLRB said, you guys, the statement you're reading these women when they're booked into jail, that it doesn't fit with state law. And CLRB said,
so they wanted to change
they wanted to change
the wording. Huh?
And the Sheriff's Department said, well, no, we're going to keep the wording because this is true. That's what we do.
That's what
we do. In most cases, we restrain women during labor, delivery, and recovery.
So your story comes out, and then they kind of scramble a little bit, it sounds like, and they contacted you, they contacted us, and said, well, no, that's not really what we do.
Their policy is great. Their written policy fits with state law. It says everything state law says. You have to make this safety finding first. And when I was working on the story, I went to the Sheriff's Department. I said, hey, your written policy says this, but your pregnant patient's right says this, and your spokeswoman is telling me that you're restraining all inmates. And so now they're going back and pointing to their policy, which I never said there was any problems with their written policy.
It was in practice.
It's what they're doing in practice that's a little strange.
I was joking on Twitter that parenting is hard enough without being handcuffed going into it. But is there a rash of pregnant women running away from custody when they're giving birth?
There is no, the data shows that no women have tried to escape. The official National OBGYN Association, I can't remember their name, they said there's no rationale. There's nothing supporting shackling of any kind of any woman. Just don't have guards in the room to catch them if they try to run away, or if they start lashing out or something, then you restrain them. But you don't start them off restrained. I mean, I've never had a child. My friends who have, and the pain that they tell me about, I can't imagine.
Those of us who've been in labor and delivery when our wives have given birth, it's hard to imagine them getting up and running away. I don't know. Anyway, you talked to some inmates, or you've tried to find out what's actually happening in the jail in light of this confusion?
I'm going to have a follow-up story that, I have found some inmates who say that they were restrained. One woman described the whole process as horrific. So,
and doctors, what do they say about this practice?
Doctors say don't do it. And medical personnel does have the right to tell the sheriffs remove these restraints from this woman because it's gonna harm her health or the health of the baby.
All right, Steve.
How often does this even come up? Where you have somebody in a jail who's giving birth?
I believe there were
you had a figure in the story.
54 women who've given birth over the last, that's since January 1st, 2015 through March 31st, 2018.
So one or two a month, maybe.
Something like
that.
Yeah.
All right, I did want to turn to a different complaint now about the Sheriff's Department. And Jeff, you reported this week that the Sheriff's Department tends not to tell the public about deaths of those in custody, usually until maybe a reporter inquires about it. What's the policy regarding the notification about deaths?
Well, the policy was a little fuzzy. They told me that they don't like to report. One case was a suicide. The most recent one that I learned about was a suicide, and when I asked them about it, they said that they don't like to report suicides to the public because they worry it might encourage other detainees to take their life. I said, okay, that's fine, but what is the policy regarding, alerting the public when people die in custody? And they sent me a 500-page policy and procedure manual, and they directed me to one section of it. Well, I found a different section of it that says we should report every death, whether it's a homicide, a suicide, or a natural cause, via a press release. And so I sent that back.
I mean, that seemed pretty clear. That's how they report deaths to the public.
The language is very clear. When I asked the follow-up question with the department, they said, well, that policy only applies under certain circumstances, and when deaths are investigated by homicide, they make the decision on whether or not to issue a press release. So they're trying to have it both ways, it seems like. The policy does say we will report every death by press release. And listen, the reason it matters is because sometimes things happen in jail that are the result of negligence or liability on the part of San Diego County, like any large institution that detains thousands of people. In those cases, if the public's not made aware of it or the family's not made aware of it, then there may not be corrective actions taken. So that's why we care that we should be alerted as a public when people die in custody.
And how do other counties handle this? Is San Diego an outlier?
It seemed like an outlier. I obviously didn't poll every county, but I talked to about 4 or 5 other prison systems, the state, and 3 or 4 counties. They all tend to issue press releases when they happen in custody. Now, the state has so many; it's the largest system in the country. They only issue under limited circumstances, and they don't issue blanket press releases to the whole state. They target them to the regions where the inmate was from or where he was housed.
There are 40 deaths since 2007 by suicide. Do they have a suicide problem at the county jail?
Well, Kelly's done the stellar reporting on that, but whether it's a problem or not, it's a very frequent occurrence, far more so than other county jail systems.
And Kelly, you have done a lot of reporting on that. We've talked about that on this show. Is there a reluctance to report deaths because it's negative publicity as we go along, whatever the cause of the death is?
I wasn't aware of this policy, actually, so thank you, Jeff. I thought I had scrubbed, I looked through all the policies and procedures. I wasn't aware of this policy. And yeah, there would have been a point where it would have looked really bad. I think it was 2015 where there was kind of back-to-back-to-back suicides. And interestingly, the only time I'm aware of them issuing press releases were in 2 suicides. They were high-profile inmates whose capture had made news, but they were both suicides. So to say that reporting a suicide can cause suicides, but the only 2 press releases you put out were suicides, that kind of didn't.
Yes, they have a sort of a lack of consistency, I think is fair to say.
Now, might this, last question on this topic, might this be an issue in the re-election campaign? Because Sheriff Bill Gore is running this year, and those are tough for challengers to crack through because a well-known name, been there a long time, voters tend to go with the known horse.
The campaign has been sort of low profile. I know they're each out making the circuits and dealing with groups of people, so I imagine it comes up at the question and answer sessions that they're both undertaking. But this is just one of a number of issues that are confronting the sheriff's department. So I'm sure it's added to the stack of issues that he's being asked about on the trail.
All right, and of course, as the campaign election season heats up, we'll be talking about quite a bit of that and that race and many others and other issues as we move along. Well, we are going to move along. The city bought a building downtown, the latest move in dealing with the homeless crisis. The structure at 14th Street and Imperial is to be a one-stop, quote, housing navigation center to help people get off the streets and into a home. Mayor Kevin Faulkner said it was an offer so good they couldn't refuse, but not everyone sees it that way. Jeff, start with this building. What was it designed for, and what happened to the business there?
It's a skydiving center.
Kind of says it.
It went out of business. The founder and venture businessman that undertook it sank millions and millions of dollars into it. He's a big fan of aviation, and that was his dream to open that center. And it didn't fly, so to speak, commercially. So it sat vacant, and it closed, and then it was foreclosed upon by the financier, and then the city bought it early this year. The thing that I thought most curious, well, a couple of things. The city spent $7 million without conducting an appraisal, so I'm not sure that's the most prudent course of action when you're investing in real estate. You usually want to get an independent appraisal. But more curious is it's a skydiving facility, so there are 2 giant wind tunnels in the center of the building that, are 60 or 80 feet tall if you add all 3 floors. They inhibit the floor space and the usable area that people are going to need to meet and interview and fill out forms. And
yeah, so this is just to set the scene here, kind of, especially for our radio audience. You got a lot of people coming into a center during the day to get various forms, information, whatever. So you'd think it's a major office building type situation, and you've got these giant tubes in the middle of it.
Yeah, the city says that whoever is selected to operate it will just work around it. It's not a problem, and it's a really good deal for the city, and it's going to really take a bite out of the homelessness problem. Some of the real estate experts I've spoken to, and even some of the homeless service providers, aren't so convinced. They think that money could have been set aside and maybe even put in an annuity and raised, even at 5%, it would raise $300,000 or $400,000 a year to deliver direct services or to keep a system operating in perpetuity. In this case, they simply bought the building, and they're going to have an operator that interviewing clients and figuring out what they need and referring them to other services. So they're not delivering any direct services inside the building.
Okay. Kelly?
Was there any sort of kind of assessment of other available properties first to see if this was indeed the best one for this purpose?
Well, it depends who you ask, of course. The city says they did their due diligence, and yes, it's the best property. It's right next to Father Joe's, so it's located in a place where homeless people tend to congregate. Again, some people think that centralizing all the services in one place in downtown East Village is not a good strategy long term because there's so many other homeless people across the community. Another person I spoke to said the city might have done better to lease storefronts around the city in 5, 6, 7 different neighborhoods, because you only need meeting room and meeting space and desks and chairs.
The old library had been
right there, yes,
proposed.
They say that the library wasn't feasible, and this was a really good deal. Now their valuations.
Yeah, there had been earlier appraisals, right, of this particular building.
Yes, there was an appraisal in 2016 from one business to another when the property was secured as a loan, collateralized. That had it appraised at, I think, $7 million. There was secondary, what's called a broker's opinion, which is a lot more recent. That was done in December. And again, that was from one private business to another. So the city never did its own evaluation. The broker's opinion, which specifically said this is not an appraisal.
But the figure came in much higher, but it said
15 to 22 million.
Right.
So the city told the mayor's office told the city council, this is a really good deal. We're getting it for basically half of what it's worth. When I started pressing them on why they didn't do their own independent appraisal, they said it simply wasn't necessary in real estate assets. The folks that looked at it were satisfied with the materials they provided the council and said it's a good deal.
Now, is it going to cost quite a bit to convert? I mean, do they get rid of these tubes somehow? It seems like you have to take the whole center of the building out.
When I got the tour last week, they said the operator will work around the tunnels and the other infrastructure that's specific to a skydiving facility. So, but that said, it will be up to the operator to make use of the building. The city is going to turn it over and subsidize it to whoever operates it. It'll probably be either one charity or a group of charities that come in to deliver these interview services.
And they're going to be stuck with these wind tunnels?
Yeah, it actually looks like a lot of fun. We were joking that it would be a great place for a corporate, event if you could afford that.
Help the homeless.
I don't know. So my question is, was this widely known that they were looking for office space prior to this, or was this just they saw a building and they decided to buy it? I mean, that's always my question when dealing with homelessness in San Diego. What's the overall strategy, and do we even know what it is?
Well, the mayor said that the Housing Navigation Center has been a linchpin of his strategy. He's been saying that since the hepatitis outbreak last year. It was going to be at one point at 20th and B, I was told, last fall. And the mayor changed his mind on that, and that's where they put up the temporary tents. The overall strategy is multi-pronged. They have a number of different things they're trying, including supportive and permanent housing, interventions, getting people into services where they can get their ID, their address, a place to store their stuff. So they're trying to address it on a number of fronts, but they haven't met a whole lot of success.
Well, they just need more permanent housing. I mean, that's the whole.
Yeah, it all goes back to the housing.
Bottom line. A few seconds left before we have to wrap it up. Any response to the critics from Mayor Faulkner on this?
No, I didn't hear a lot of feedback from the city after that story ran. They have criticized us for reporting the issue as deeply as we have, but they haven't had any issues with the facts or...
City Council might revisit this?
I don't know, and that includes I haven't heard anything from the council members on that. So I think they're okay with their approval of it.
All right, we'll look for another follow-up there. A lot of follow-ups to the stories today. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Jeff McDonald of the San Diego Union Tribune, freelance journalist Kelly Davis, and Steve Walsh of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for being with us today, and join us again next week on the Roundtable.